There's a simple mistake that business owners make whenever they roll out a new product or service, or more importantly, when they're just getting started in their business, and it's all about pricing incorrectly. We're going to talk about pricing on today's show, and you might ask yourself, am I making the mistake that so many new business owners make whenever I launch my brand? Hey, my name is Blake Benz. I'm the host of the Good Advice podcast. You've come to the right place to learn how to grow and scale your business. There's no fluff on this podcast. It's just the good advice you need to know, the stuff that actually works to help you make more money and have a more successful business. Before we dive into today's episode, we have a word from one of the amazing businesses that sponsors the show. If you ever thought about advertising on the show, you can always reach out Blake at goodadvicecoaching.com, or you can support the podcast for as little as $5 a month on our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice. We'll be right back soon. There's one single piece of advice that I give to business owners who are ready to scale their business drastically. And that's knowing exactly what you need to hand off so that you can continue focusing on what you're an expert in. It amazes me when I talk to business owners who are doing their own bookkeeping and tax prep, and worse, that they're going through all this paperwork at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight, slaving away trying to make sense of all of the numbers for their business. Business owners who are making it happen have already figured out that you can't do it all yourself. That's why I recommend Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions. Not only is he an expert in bookkeeping and tax prep, but what I love about Steve is that he'll sit down with you and help you make sense of the value of your business beyond just reading a spreadsheet. You'll be able to make better decisions, and more importantly, you're going to save yourself the crucial time you would have spent going through QuickBooks or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night. So save yourself some time and some money by giving Steve Lay a call at Equity Business Solutions, and he'll show you the value beyond your numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutionsllc.com to find out more. So what I want to talk about today is honestly one of the most common mistakes I see new business owners make. I either have this question proposed to me often on how do I price my stuff, or I come across business owners who they think they're doing something very clever, and yet they're wondering why they're not generating any momentum in their business. This conversation usually revolves around pricing your stuff and trying to stand out with all the other competition you might have when it comes to your buyers. So getting to the point, talking today about this simple question. You have a product, you have a service. What's the dollar sign amount that I attach to it? How much do I charge for this thing that I am good at or have the specific expertise for, or this niche that I'm really going after? How do I price it? We've talked about this a lot on the podcast in the past. I think I've even had an episode called How Do I Price My Stuff? And it's a bit of a similar conversation. But I want to have a little bit of a different conversation today. I don't necessarily want to go through the mechanics of pricing what it is you're selling. I want to instead talk about buying mentality, buyer philosophy, and the problem that business owners run into. What I typically find more often than not is that new, younger business owners, younger meaning newer to the game, nothing to do with age, newer to the game. They're a little bit more green when it comes to being in the business world or running their own brand. What I typically find is business owners are scared of charging a fair rate. And more importantly, they typically introduce themselves with a cheaper price, thinking that this is a compelling point for their buyer. What you need to know is that this actually is not a compelling point. This is not a great strategy. This is not a way to differentiate yourself from your competitors. The only time you ever really see this is when a large-scale brand, they've worked the numbers, they've worked the math, and they have an intentional brand around being a cheaper product. So I think about, for example, Great Value, which is a Walmart brand or a Walmart line of products. So this is something that they've rolled out intentionally to compete with some of the name brand things that are out there, and to be able to do that at a bit more of an affordable price. They are, the biggest company in the world. All the nuance and difficulty around running a scalable brand when it comes to offering a cheap price, Walmart has the deep pockets, they have the cash flow, they have the incredible pool of talent that many of us don't have. The average person is not going to be able to run a business on being the most affordable option or the cheapest option. I'll give an example. I've told this story before. I was talking to a baker, a home baker. She bakes cakes for a living and then sells them. And one of her complaints or the problem that she was working through was, I have customers who are frustrated by my prices because they can just get it cheaper at Walmart. And so her question was, how do I drop my prices to compete with Walmart? Because this is killing me. This is really difficult for me. Now, my advice to her was, it's not a question of price, it's a question of customer, in that you are going after the wrong customer. The person who's willing to spend money on an artisan cake is not the same person who wants to just go down to Walmart and buy a cake off a shelf. They're two entirely different clienteles. And if you get this backwards, if you get this confused, then you're going to find yourself frustrated by the lack of revenue in your business. But before I get too far into that conversation, because I have an example I want to point to a little later in our talk today, before we get farther into that, let's back up a little bit and let's talk about what a new business owner, how they typically approach entering the market. What a new business owner does is they have an idea for a service, they have an idea for a product, they launch the business, and they offer their product at a price point that is significantly lower than what competitors are charging. What the average business owner thinks in this process is that by offering the lower price, customers are going to be excited and, oh my gosh, I can get it for half the price of where I might get it somewhere else. We think that this is going to cause people to engage in conversations with us and ultimately become great, happy customers with us. This is actually not how people buy. People don't rush to the cheapest option. We know there's quite a bit of buying philosophy behind the scenes here of when you're looking at the most expensive or the cheapest. We know that people typically go for something in the middle. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to price your things around the middle, but it is a huge red flag if you're trying to be the cheapest offer. I was having a conversation with someone, this would have been probably a year or two ago, and we were talking about his SEO services. And he said, yeah, I basically asked him, hey, what's your go-to-market plan? Like, what's your plan to get more customers? And he said, okay, well, if the average person is going to charge $500, $700, $1,000 a month, then my thinking is, if I can essentially get these services done myself for as little as $200 a month, then what I'll do is I'll market it as that. I'm gonna get all these customers. It's going to be great. He said, what do you think about that? And I said, man, I just don't know about that. I don't know about that because if I'm a buyer, my first response isn't, oh my gosh, I can get the same thing, but for $800 cheaper. What's my first thought? You listening, you as the listener, when you see something that's heavily reduced from the typical buying price, what's your response? What's your thought? Your thought, I would guess, is, what's wrong with this? What's happening here? What's the full story? Hang on, something's strange here. By the way, we have the same reaction when we see this by digital marketers online. Someone will post a plan, like a business plan or a strategy or some kind of course that they're selling, and they'll have it at a highly discounted price. They'll say something like, hey, this is the exact strategy I use for $1 million brands, and I typically sell it to them for $10,000, but today and today only, I'm giving it away for just $1. Now, what's your reaction to that? Is your reaction, oh my gosh, I need to call everyone I know to get them to buy this? This is insane. Your reaction is typically, what's really going on here? Hang on, what's really happening here? I'm very curious about this. What's going on here? This doesn't make any sense. It's often with criticism and disbelief and uncertainty. Now, some of these, just cluing you in on this, some of these larger brands or these smarter digital marketers What they're really doing is they're banking on your engagement of your disbelief in that this has to be a scam. I'm going to look more about this person. I'm going to look more into this offer. And what you think you're being doing your due diligence, what's actually happening is they're drawing you deeper and deeper into their funnel. They're having redirected ads go to you. If you bounce from their page, they're tracking that and they're putting another ad in front of you. They're spending hundreds and thousands of dollars to get their content back in front of you among many other people. So for these larger brands, as stupid as it sounds, these larger brands actually have a pretty clever process about using kind of the shock value of the sticker price to get you engaged with their buying funnel. For the average business owner, that's not the case. The average business owner, especially the young business owner doesn't always have the cash for something like that. And so what happens is we think we're doing a service to our buyer, but really what we're doing is we are devaluing our service and we are communicating risk to our buyer. The buyer is asking, why is it so cheap? What's wrong with it? What is the whole story? A good example of this would be, I remember Tony Robbins. I haven't listened to Tony Robbins in years, but early on in Good Advice, I was driving and I was listening to a Tony Robbins podcast, and he was giving business advice to someone. And I was trying to soak up as much as I could from as many business personas as possible. So I had a Tony Robbins kick. I had a Gary Vee kick. I still like Gary Vee today, by the way. I think Gary Vee's a very smart business person. Mark Cuban. There's a number of people that I was following, and including in that, not really important for the podcast, but also people early on who I followed and thought, I don't really gel with you. We have different values. I'm not going to say any names, but some people who are still around today, where back then I was listening to a little bit of their content and I was like, I don't know about that. I'm not sure about that. That's not really how I want to be known for doing business, which is fine. But I remember Tony Robbins was talking to someone. This person ran a gym. And the first question that Tony Robbins asked was, okay, how much does your gym membership cost? And the guy said, yeah, well, most gyms in our area, they charge $50 a month, but we're able to charge $10 a month. And Tony said, okay, well, how's your gym doing? And he said, we're having a really tough time getting new members. And he said, here's my first thought. Why are you charging $10 for something that everyone knows costs $50? If every gym in the area charges $50 for this and you're charging $10, your customer isn't running to you thinking, hey, we can get the gym membership here. The customer's thinking, what's really going on here? And it's similar advice to what I gave the man selling SEO services of, you think the $200 is a price point that's compelling, but actually it's inducing apprehension in your buyer. It's making them wonder, how good could this service really be? It's why it's always important whenever you're selling something in your business, it's always important to have a finger on the pulse of what something like this typically costs, and then fluctuating the value of it accordingly. Now, understand something. If you're new to something, you're selling something for the first time, maybe you're not sure how it's going to pan out, or you at least recognize that there's a bit of a beta process to all of this, you might sell something for a discount. A good example of this might be the podcast course that I sell, PodStart, which is the podcast course where we teach people literally everything top to bottom on podcasting. It's a $500 class. Well, when I first sold that, I sold it, I think, at around maybe $250, something like that. And the conversation was basically, I was very direct and honest. I said, you know what? I'm going to eventually charge $500 for this. I'm going to charge you $250 because I'd love to figure out, like, the content's all figured out. The expertise is all there, but I want to figure out how to package this and sell this in the most beneficial way. Is that something you're willing to partner with me on? Are you willing to take a cheaper price as we collaborate and think about how this course would best be developed? And part of that process was, in working with that first customer, was, how many weeks should this course be? Hey, we just did 2 weeks. Do we think we need one more? I have a little bit more content around that. Should we add that in its own module? Yes, I think you should. Okay, great. Let's work that out. Let's talk about it. And then I think I even from there, I brought the price up, but continued to iterate it to get it to where it is today. So there's nothing wrong with having a communicative process with your buyer on, yes, I can do that. I'm not really sure though. And in fact, I wouldn't even say that. I wouldn't say I'm not sure. I would say something like, yes, I can do that. It's not fully packaged or developed or what have you, but I'm willing to sell it at a beta rate or what have you. Beyond that kind of niche situation, you should have an idea of what you sell in terms of what it costs. I know that podcast production, I know that consulting, like business consulting, can be thousands of dollars per year. I'm not going to charge $200 for it. I had a guy that I talked to I was swapping notes with a guy very early on in good advice. I think my very first customer paid $4,600. And I was having a conversation with another business coach. And I was asking him, like, what's your price point? What does this look like for you? And he goes, I think, and I'm going to butcher the story because I can't fully remember it, but it was something like I charged $200 and the person gets like 20 meetings with me or what have you, which by the way, selling outcomes, when you're selling an outcome to someone, I need to have a whole nother conversation and a whole nother episode on this, by the way. When you're selling an outcome to someone, you really want to avoid distracting from that outcome by making it about certain numbers on hours delivered or the hours you get from me or numbers of sessions or what have you. A good example of this is if you're selling, I had a conversation with the business the other day. We're going to do some SEO work for them. We're going to get their business to the front page. And he goes, well, how many hours does this get me? And I said, it doesn't get you any hours. That's not how we do business. What's going to happen is you're going to be on page one. What's going to happen is you're going to make more than what you spent on this, and it's going to be good for your business. And he said, yeah, but I typically hear people say like, you get this many hours. And I said, that's not how I do business. And I said, and frankly, what does it matter to you how many hours you're getting if at the end of our time together, it works? What does that matter to you? I have the same. Now, there is like an actual like logistical conversation that happens here. When I sell consulting services or we're talking about business consulting, I might have a customer or someone who comes to me, a prospect, and they're like, hey, this is where my business is today. Where are we going to take it? And I never make any guarantees because ultimately they're the ones running their business. But I typically say, hey, yeah, most people work with me for about 6 months to a year. And then we either continue on from there or we move to a more kind of like a maintenance conversation or an on-call kind of conversation. And typically what that looks like is the dollar amount. Here's the dollar amount for it. And here's some of the deliverables that we typically see. The first one is typically an increase in revenue. We typically look at your sales process. We typically look at how to save you some money and the money you're spending on running your business. And it's full on top to bottom approach. And for different customers, sometimes it's more nuanced than that. Sometimes it's more hyper focused. I might have a customer that it's all about the team, all about managing the team and working through some of the details there. But those are the general outcomes that we typically see. But I'm not selling like, hey, you're buying my expertise for 4 meetings. Now, once we're moving to sign the contract, there are conversations on what does the work look like between us. And that's usually when I roll out we're going to meet every 30 days, or for certain customers, it might be every 60 days. Here's what the pacing is going to look like. Here's what communication between us should look like. You're going to hear from me every week. This is the best way to reach me. And that's all very like customer experience type of conversation stuff, all those data points. But it's not my selling point. It's not how I sell my services to someone. I don't say, hey, well, if you want 3 meetings, this is what it costs. But if you want 4 meetings, this is what it costs. And I even find myself in conversations with business owners around this where I'm turning down business or I'm guiding them away from me. I had someone who came to me the other day who said, hey, I want to buy an hour of your time. What's your hourly rate? And she said, I could really use your help for my business. Well, my response to her was, that's actually just not how I do business. I don't do an hourly rate. And I don't do now between you and me, do I have an idea of what my hourly rate is? Yes, I do. When I run my business and I think about the time investment and I think about how much money I want to make from the work that I'm doing for people, I absolutely have an idea of what I want that hourly rate to be. But I'm not a plumber. I'm not an electrician. I don't have a fee per hour for when you hire me out or what have you. And in fact, now that I even say that, I have an electrician customer right now, we're wrapping up our contract actually. I have a electrician customer where I've encouraged him to move away from hourly rates and instead to the price per project. So is it called roughing in a house? I think when you're like wiring a house, this is what it costs to wire that house. Based on the square footage, it's going to cost you this much rather than, hey, you can pay for 10 hours for me. You can pay for 20 hours for me. This is what it costs to get the outcome you desire. So that's typically how I price my stuff. And so when someone comes to me and they say, can I buy an hour of your time? I usually say no. Because, and maybe I need to give myself more credit, but I honestly, I'm like, I don't know, what are we going to accomplish in an hour? I mean, in 1 hour, we're going to probably spend most of that time figuring out what's going on with your business and getting a sense of how much money are you making? What's revenue look like? How many customers do you have? How many customers are you keeping? What's your whole process? Talk to me about when a prospect first comes to you and they're interested, what's your process for selling them? And then once they've bought from you, what's the whole shebang from day one of them as your customer to day what have you, however long it takes? Walk me through that whole process. Let's figure out how this thing really works. I mean, do you think we're really going to handle this in 1 hour? And then you're going to walk away with, here's the deal. I'm smart. I run a good business. I have very many. That's such a Trumpism. I have the most beautiful, the most incredible. I have many great customers, happy customers who have achieved some incredible things 2 times, 3 times, 4 times their revenue. But in our conversation, none of that happens in 1 hour. So I found myself in this conversation with this person saying basically, I can't help you. I can't help you in an hour. I can't make a compelling difference in 1 hour. I'm good at what I do, but there's a process for this. And I've talked about it before on the podcast. Damon Burton, who runs SEO National, incredible SEO company, does a great job. A lot of what I do, I say a lot of what I do, 90% of what I do has come from him in terms of the SEO side of things. But one thing Damon talks a lot about is it takes 1 year for good SEO to have an impact. Damon is the best in the business. He's done this for 20 years. If there's anyone who knows how Google works and all the different details and algorithms and all this stuff, Damon's the one who knows it. Well, Damon tells a story about when someone comes to him and they say, hey, okay, it's going to cost, and Damon's, by the way, charging, $40,000, $50,000 to do SEO for his customers per customer, right? But when a customer comes and says, hey, I'll pay you $100,000 to do it in 6 months, Damon doesn't say, okay, great, let's do it. Damon says, no, it takes a year. There's a process to this. There's a timing to this. It takes a year. And in the same way, that's how I've approached it for my business is if you're going to see the biggest outcome, here's the process, and then here's the investment associated with it. You're never going to take your business somewhere meaningful by trying to be the cheapest person on the block. You have to understand that when people buy, price is just one piece of the conversation. Price is a great qualifier for who's your customer and who's not your customer. But ultimately, the price is only something on the side compared to the outcome you're going to accomplish for someone. And I think that's maybe the most important part of our conversation today. Rather than thinking about how to have the best price, ask yourself, how do I have the best product? How do I have the best service? What is everyone offering? And at what quality are they offering it? And am I just one of those other options for a buyer? Or am I truly offering something meaningful, better, improved from what everyone else is doing? If the answer is no, then you got a lot more problems than price. Now, the tough thing about this is that we often think that we are the best. Like, oh, no one's like our product or service. I sat down with a gentleman who was selling journals essentially. And I think his journal was like $25 for a journal. So we sat down, I was looking at the journal, and I said, so how does this compare to like your biggest competitor, which was a national brand? And he said, oh, it's way better. Their journals are crap. Like ours are way better than theirs. And they price, they're priced accordingly. Ours are $25 each. That national one's about $15 each. I'm making up these numbers because I don't remember the exact details. Well, I was looking at the journal and the journal looked good. And I said, well, do you happen to have one of the competitors' journals? He said, actually, I do. Hands me the competitor's journal. And or maybe I looked it up online. I can't remember. And I looked at it and thought, these kind of look the same to me. They're pretty similar. Now, granted, I'm not a big journaler, so I'm actually a pretty terrible teller of this story, because as not being the targeted buyer for this person, what do I know about journals, right? But it's a good question for yourself of when you think that what you sell is so much better than everyone else, would your customers say that? Would your buyers say that? Would people agree with you and say, yes, this was actually better than every other option on the market? And if the answer is yes, your point of pride is not to say we sell something better and it's cheaper. You should be increasing your prices. The value should match the outcome. If you're doing something that no one else is doing, if you're delivering a level of quality that no one else is delivering on, your prices should go up because it matches all of the expertise and brilliance of what it is you're actually selling. And this doesn't mean that you should just, raise your prices endlessly, because there comes a point where people are like, you know what, as great as it is, I just can't afford it. I can't do it. Or the band of buyers becomes so narrow that without more profound marketing efforts and spending dollars on advertising, you can't reach those people in a way that is a meaningful enough connection to put them in your pipeline and help them become your customer. I think about someone I've talked about on the podcast, someone who was selling $20,000 a month or $20,000 a year, some outrageous number for some of their coaching. And it was like, do you have any customers? Well, no, I don't. And it's like, well, maybe because the price point's so high, it's making that band of potential buyers so narrow that you're having a really hard time connecting with who those people might be. All that to say, going to market with the cheapest price is a losing strategy. It does not work long term. It's not good for your business. And the last thing I'll tell you is it doesn't usually attract great customers. It actually usually attracts the worst kind of customers. I want to pull up this post that Damon actually shared recently. I saw this post and was thinking, yes, I love this. This is incredibly true. Let's see if I can pull this up real quick. I'm the king of referencing something that I don't have in front of me. Okay, here we go. So Damon shared this email that he got. He got this email that said, "Attention, digital marketing agencies." And the text reads this: "One of my clients, a startup with big dreams but a lean budget, is looking to hire an agency to help build their brand from the ground up. If your agency can deliver effective marketing solutions without breaking the bank, I'd love to connect you directly." If you ever get a message like this, run. Run as fast as you can. Because this is not someone who is inspirational about their brand. This is not someone who's going to recognize your genius and become an incredible customer of yours. This is someone who's going to be an endless amount of work. An endless amount of work. The people that you try to do a favor for, or cut them a break, or give them a special deal, or what have you, are often the biggest pains in your rear compared to the customer who just says, "Okay, great. Where do I sign?" It's just a simple truth of having done business long term. It's also why I talk about this a lot on the podcast. I don't do like family discount. No one in my family's ever asked to buy from me. They never would. But I don't do any kind of like special discounts. Or even my old pastor, a huge mentor in my life, called about, and this person was formative in my years growing up, called about the Pod Start program and said, "Hey, we're launching a podcast. I need this. What does it cost?" And I said, $500. That's what it costs. Now, to be fair to him, I said, "I do feel like I should give you a discount for all that you've done for me. And he said, no, I want to pay the full amount. I get it. So understand, people value what they pay for. So be nervous when you're the cheapest price on the block. Hey, that's today's good advice. Thanks so much for tuning into the podcast today. It is such a pleasure and a delight to be able to share some good advice with you. If you've been listening to the podcast and you're a first-time listener, what the heck are you waiting on? Click the subscribe or follow button so you can keep getting good advice wherever you are. And if you want to support the podcast, remember you can always join our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice for only $5 a month. In today's economy, man, that's a steal, you know? All that to say, I appreciate our advertisers on the show, and I appreciate those of you who've supported the podcast long term. That's today's good advice. We'll catch you later. See you.